Bam. Uh, we have begun.
Indeed.
Thanks for joining us with the Octopus Marquee. I am the octopus with me, Rouzbeh Rashidi. Um, and before I continue too much, you can hear everything great. There's none of the external noise. I'm just at a brewery where I don't have little octopus sprinting around me, and you got your coffee, so we're all set. Yeah, I feel like everyone that's watching this very likely already knows you, knows your work or is familiar enough with your name. So we don't, unless if you'd like to, we don't necessarily need to go full into the log cabin you were born in and how you grew up to be president and all this. but but just to get into the beginning here, as a filmmaker, as a film theorist, as someone that's doing classes, mentoring, everything that you're doing. I truly look at you as one of the great cinematic metaphysicists of our time. Uh, you've really encapsulated a lot of the the drive of indie filmmaking, um, but then also doing so in a completely unique and different way. You're not, not that there's anything wrong with making films in a traditional manner. In fact, I respect it, very much honor it. But I've noticed in recent posts and conversations you've done, you've had this concept, very much like the like Plato's theory of the forms, where the film is something that already exists beyond our reach, beyond our imagination, just like the concept of the chair is is there.
Yeah.
And it's our goal to find this chair or find this film or find this reality. Um, how do you get to the point where you're discovering the film you are trying to make? And then just as a concept, can you go more into this idea of this metaphysical film that you're striving and reaching for?
Hmm. Well, thank you, David. I really appreciate this. And it's worth mentioning that before we hit the record button, we were having this wonderful conversation about David's film, which I had the pleasure to get to know them recently. And it really, Max was telling me about your film. And of course, I knew you from social media. But over the past few days, since you sent me your wonderful films, I watched them one time a few days ago. But today, I specifically, because I wanted to somehow put myself, for me, it's very important. Actually, I'm going to talk about this, very important in filmmaking, also in teaching, to get to know the world of the students or get to know the world of the people I collaborate with. For me, it's very important to somehow go to their universe. And I think it's a very interesting technique for a filmmaker to have the ability to not exclusively remain within their body or kind of corpus or whatever you want to call it, and somehow have the ability to somehow transfer themselves into the different dimension and look at other people, just kind of see and kind of listen. And for me, it was fascinating. I was literally one film that I'm sorry, you kind of asked this question, but for me, it's a way to somehow navigate myself and somehow reach to that point that you ask. I'm going to specifically talk about one of your films called Sisyphus and the Abraham. I hope I'm
Yeah,
pronouncing
yeah.
correctly. This film was a very fascinating film because I literally, when I was watching this film, I could literally see myself in behind the scene of that film in a very physical manner. I could hear the cracks of stairs that the people were walking. I could hear very vividly that the guy was being drowned inside the bathtub, or I could see when these two people were eating kimchi, I think. It was a very strange choice. I think it
Thank
was
you.
very
Yeah.
visceral. I love this. I love these choices. I mean, for me, film has always been something beyond the normal intellect, beyond the normal kind of rationale, beyond the normal logic. It's something I'm very deeply interested in the body and senses. And of course, you're dealing with a very kind of, what also really affected me was this kind of um, 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 self-produced self-invention of moralism, and this is something I'm very, very interested in. We are really dealing with, of course, you have a direct influence of Albert Camus or Kierkegaard, or kind of fear and trembling and all those extraordinary references that you are doing. But the fact that you somehow create a space for the audience to go to this, to enter to this door and go there, whatever happens
Mhm.
after the door is really beyond our control. I think it's really not the concern of a filmmaker, but the filmmaker's job is to open this door, and you can literally see and hear that you're opening the door. And I could go there and I could see these two characters. If I'm not mistaken, maybe they're even brothers in real life.
Mhm.
Maybe it's just so strange that how much you can sense and feel, and how much it's now related to you. And because we were having this conversation over the past few weeks on Instagram, and suddenly I saw this film. This is, for me, this is really where the magic of cinema lies. It's something I never, maybe I will never see you for the rest of my life. But in my vision, in my internal landscape, in my emotion, I think I've already met you, and I've already have dined with you in a restaurant, and we talked for hours and hours, infinity about life. That's how I feel about you after seeing this film. Of
Oh,
course,
thank you. Yeah.
I've never seen, but what caused this is cinema. This atmosphere, this internal landscape produced this feeling, produced this sensation to me, and that is why I'm saying, perhaps most of the times, many of the films that we want to embark on a journey of making them, they have already been made. There exist somewhere around us in this energy, almost like kind of like the force, kind of like a very strange kind of comparison to a Star Wars, but it's true, kind of like the force is all over you. And then you walk through life and you see things and you sense things. And then you go and you somehow develop a very kind of unique, fragile and very vulnerable series of techniques, and you go and you somehow play with this material, and the film reveals itself to you. All you have to do, you have to
Mhm.
be there like a gardener and take care of it, and it grows. Most of the times we are not really making teams. It has its life of its own. It grows. All you have to do to create an environment, you provide a little bit of sun, and kind of if there is another tree, you somehow push it away, or somehow you add another layer of soil. You take care of it. You take care of this very fragile thing, and the entity grows. And for me, this your films was a very vivid manifestation of this idea that I got to know you, and I could feel these things. And the fact that, for example, in Sublime Hubris, you were having this very intense, very hard, very philosophical monologues over this character who was just sitting on a bench, or he was sleeping at the beginning, and he woke up and he ate something, and you somehow you see, and then suddenly you appeared kind of limping, with kind of almost half naked. These are the images that, although I have never seen them before, but I have memory of them. For me, it really gives me goosebumps. It's not even deja vu, really. But I really have felt that, although I was seeing these films for the first time, I felt that I'm seeing a memory of something that I have seen before. But of course, I've never seen them before. But for me, it was like a memory that I have experienced before. I lived them before, but of course, I didn't. This duality, this complex, for me, is everything. And when a filmmaker manages to do something like this, I know that the job is done. I know it's not a reproduction of reality. I know it's not a Xerox of reality, because most of the films that we are seeing, no offense, people have different approaches. and I respect everybody, people going through a very difficult period of producing these films. It's not about judgment, but at the same time, we have our stances, we have our attribution, we have our traits as well. But for me, when I encounter something like this, suddenly for me everything makes sense. Makes sense. I feel that I am alive again. I feel that I have reason to live. Really, I literally mean it. For me, it's not a compliment that I just want to give you just for the sake of the conversation. For me, this sensation, because you live with this film, so perhaps that's what I mean when I was saying that, you know, the film exists outside the perception of the filmmaker, it
Mhm.
exists in life, and this really transcends also the category of experimental cinema. This also, or any category. Really, after all these years, I really have reached to the point that I'm not sure even if I'm making experimental film. It's something, it's a term that I have lost faith in it. I want to
Mhm.
be very sincere. It is really cinema, you know, this is really cinema in a very pure sense, in a very utterly raw, primal sense, as if an ancient man, an archaic man standing on the top of a hill and kind of looking at a kind of a desert or landscapes and kind of contemplating about this sensation is very primal, you know. When I see a vision like this, it gives me same sensation, you know, same feeling. So I really want to thank you for sharing your films. It somehow
Oh yeah,
really evoked something very profound in me. Sorry, I'm kind of rambling to all the
no, yeah, yeah.
directions.
Well, I think very much. I often think in, let's say, either dualities or trinities, right? So you're looking at a film, and the film is in it of itself its own entity. It is a film. It is, I'm looking at this point A to point B, this specific structure. Meanwhile, at the same time, you know, last time with Maximilian, we were talking about personal cinema, stuff like that. You often look at it too as, like you were saying, an extension of the artist or filmmaker, or, you know, in a Disney sense, the extension of a corporate conglomerate, right?
Yes.
But essentially, we look at it as a continuation of the artist itself. And then the viewer is as much a part of the film as the film. Now, I like the idea of we're not necessarily creating cinema with the viewer in mind. However, in addition to that, once you've watched Sisyphus and the Abraham, and you have these images and you have these concepts and these continuations of your own experiences, the film is as much yours as it is mine, as it is its own entity, right? So it's this concept of it's multiple things at once. It's this concept of a cinematic trinity, right? Something beyond the physical realm of understanding and appreciating and everything like that. Um, so you kind of saying all that really made me think of this duality or trinity as pieces are their own thing. They are also the artists themselves, and they are also the people that see it. Um, Seeing, luckily, these past 2, 3, however many weeks, I've kind of gotten to know you a little bit better and really just appreciated some of our talks and have just enjoyed sharing films and our discussion. And one thing that I've heard you saying in the past, but then also I really gravitated to is seeing your work, uh, even though you have these different stages that you know, everyone
Yes.
this decade, you know, Godard was doing jazzy films. In this decade, he was doing more experimental pro-Palestine stuff. In this decade, he was doing, you know, saturated colors, everything like that. Um, And I've noticed a string through your work is this concept or this idea of mystery,
Yes.
where we are, as the viewers or as yourself, are either an omnipotent or an alien or something outside of the film, outside of the narrative, outside of the image. And even with a film I just really loved, which was this your first feature length film, Only Human?
Yes. Yes.
Um, Seeing that when I kind of knew you for your later stuff, it was such a stark like I kind of stepped back of like, oh, this is gonna be this is gonna be good. I was so excited when I saw that first shot with the lake and the teens kind of early romantic,
Exactly.
childhood love. Um, but seeing that, I just kind of paused it when the biker went by, and I'm just like, all right. I did a little walk around my living room, just like, okay, let's get ready. This is gonna be fun. Um, how you had all these long takes that a lot of times when we think of long takes, we think of, Perkowski or Bellatar or something that is so beautiful and and I feel like you do have meticulous shot blocking with, you know, placing through doors, placing through windows, placing through everything is so meticulously planned. However, the entire film felt so authentically human, but in a way where we're watching humans.
Yes.
We're watching this all unfold in a semi-narrative, but more so that we're seeing life. We're
Hmm.
seeing all these different people just existing and going through their day. We're still seeing parallel moments of the early end of the film having the late, and then the later end of the film after a heartbreak. Seeing this duality moment of okay, now she's looking at a lake and the duck and everything. Um, that going from that to then through your work to the later end of, I think it's a great intentionally or unintentionally a companion piece or spiritual successor of Phantom Islands,
Yes.
where we are once again now with color, now with predominantly two and three, four
Mhm.
technically, but predominantly two characters, and we are watching them from afar, but entering their dreams or their subconscious or their desire or however we're interpreting or experiencing this. Um, it very much feels like a similar experience as an outside viewer, as
Yes.
someone outside of this world, or
Hmm.
now we're in this world and we're like, what is going on? But we still feel what is going on. And
Exactly.
then we get into, and after this, your newest work. But in terms of, which is also filled with mystery and filled with, but very identifiable. Uh, could you elaborate on? You've used the term mystery before, so that's kind of what I'm latching on to. Um, but this concept of how you are expressing yourself, whether it is literal or whether it is this subconscious, you're on the outside looking in, and what we are seeing in front of us is the tale you want to tell or the experience you feel you need to share.
Sure, sure. Well, thank you so much for this wonderful elaboration. I really appreciate this, and thank you for taking
Yeah,
your time
and thanks for
and
joining. You're all
thank you. You said something about the audience, and that's very true. This perhaps maybe I can answer your question in two different parts. One is the notion of the audience, and you said that although we are not thinking about audience, but audience is always a part of it. I think the very exact reason because we do not think about audience, that is why the audience becomes everything. The
Mhm.
moment you want to think about audience, you go to the domain of somehow deciding for them, as if you get to know them. And this will bring us to this very Gilles Deleuzian concept that when he talks about this wonderful concept that when you're making a film, you are making a film for the entire people that have ever existed and existing and will exist. This constitute or somehow manifest or amount to have about 100 billion so far. People who have all the people, Homo sapiens who have ever lived. It's a very strange concept. It's impossible to get to know these people. And this is a very bizarre concept, but it's impossible. So what you can do is you can imagine some kind of a womb that is devoid of a baby, which is the audience. You create this womb and you create a cinematic womb. You create a life, a factory of life. You create a realm that life can exist in it. But the audience, the human or the entity is devoid of that. You somehow present this notion to the world, and anyone can come and exist in it. So you're somehow making a film not only for people who are watching the film, but to people who have died even, or the audience of the future. This concept for me is very, very profound. And the only way you can approach this is to entirely eliminate the concept of audience itself. It's a very bizarre thing. It's like, it's like Pascal, the great French philosopher. He talks about you want to talk about the concept of silence, but the very fact that you're talking about it, you're ruining this concept. So there is no more silence. So it's a very similar way. We want to we want to make film for the audience, but the moment we think about the audience, we are not making films for. So it's a very, very bizarre concept. So you have to create a space rather than the consequence for me. And that's why, for example, your film is, the Sisyphus and the app, it's a space, it's a world, it's like in a Tarkovskian way, it's a sculpture made with time. It exists, it's an autonomous world, and audience can go and do so many things with it. But the fact that we eliminated thinking and getting to know the audience, there exists a place for the audience can come into it. That's one thing. So I'm glad you mentioned this. But for me, it took me many, many years to realize this because I always had self-doubt. Because making art is really about self-doubt as a skepticism. I'm a very skeptic person. I really, in that sense, I'm very close to J.G. Ballard. He says as I'm a great believer. I believe, but I believe in nothing. So, in that sense, I'm a very Ballardian person. I'm a great believer, but I believe in nothing, absolutely nothing. But at the same time, I have a massive passion for believing, just the believing itself, but about nothingness. So, and their cinema comes in. In terms of somehow mystery, this is also a very good question. I always talk about this. And also when I want to teach cinema, the only way that I can teach cinema is to create some kind of a autopsy of my life and my own psyche. And I have no problem with sharing very extremely intimate and personal details about my life because I think my life and my art and my films are the exact same thing. There is no difference whatsoever. I'm not one of those people who is able to separate and divide the artist and the artwork. I can't do this. I have no objection towards people who are able to do this. I respect their decision. But for me, it's one singular entity, just one unit. You can't separate this. So this notion of mystery really goes back to the way I have lived and grew up in Iran. When I was growing up in Iran, I was born in the year 1980, and it's the year that war has happened, and I was basically born in a war. And when you somehow kind of dealing with war, of course it's a horrific, nightmarish situation. You have to survive. You don't intellectualize, you don't necessarily comprehend your life. It's a very different mannerism than kind of European post-World War II generation that they have an ability to, they're born in peace and they can somehow slow down and they can intellectualize and they can rationalize their way of living. But when I was born in Iran, I really didn't have time, or I didn't have any capacity to intellectualize or to rationalize my life. I always survived. And then after that, we are dealing with a very authoritarian, autocrat government, and again, you have to survive. So many things left unexplained, many things left extremely mysterious, many things left deeply enigmatic. On top of that, when you're living in the Middle East, and specifically in a country like Iran, you're dealing with a massive amount of arbitrary violence. These violence are inherent in everyday living. I mean, you might be walking down the street with your sister, and suddenly the moral police could come and beat the shit out of your sister just for the sake of not having hijab.
Sure.
You ne you never understand this violence. I mean, there is no way that you can rationalize this audience. When you have the inability to rationalize, you have no choice but to go to fantasy. You have no choice but to go to an enigmatic wrapping of this event in order to, it's like a defense mechanism in order to continue to live. So this violence, this arbitrary violence was everywhere. It was inside my school from our teacher. They used to kind of apply physical forces to us, kind of very kind of physical discipline. It was in the kind of inherent existence of human right. It was everywhere.
Sure.
So this mystery, this kind of lack of understanding, lack of connection with reality really produced a kind of very bizarre sensation in me and in my generation. And I assume people who are still living in Iran. I left Iran 20 years ago, but in some ways I never left Iran.
Yeah.
Still, so it's a very immigration is a very bizarre, mysterious process. Once you leave, you don't belong to the original place, and you don't belong in a kind of place that you immigrated to. You always remain in this kind of liminal space. It's always about liminality. You can never make a home, and you can never go back to your previous home. So again, when I rationalize, when I kind of somehow look at my life, it was never about understanding my life. It was never about making sense. It was always about surviving many mysterious situations. One mystery led to another mystery. One enigma led to another enigma. And of course, I am the consequences of my own living. And this has directly influenced and informed my filmmaking approach. And I do the exact same thing as I have lived. Really, it's like a ghost of the past. It's now with me and making films. I am somehow there like a scaffolding, and this ghost is somehow on top of this scaffolding and kind of pursue me or somehow guides me in order to do things. And that's why I'm very much interested in horror cinema, or for example in occult or in science fiction or in otherworldly universes. That's why people like Luis Buñuel have a tremendous amount of importance for me, or Raul Ruiz, or people, or even Tarkovsky. This kind of extreme poetic, because you can never understand these words either. You somehow always about this sensorial and emotional relationship with these places. It's always about emotions or always about sensory experiences. It's
Sure.
never about understanding. And of course, Tarkovsky literally says that if you focus on understanding, you will miss everything that is happening into the film. So again, I'm the I could, and I mean, I argue and somehow discuss this with my students that I don't even have a choice when I make films. This is the only type of film I can make because this is the type of life I had. And I tell them that you have to go and scrutinize and really analyze the way you lived. And like a child, you have to somehow shrink yourself, go to your childhood and go back in time and see those memories. Childhood is very, very important, fascinatingly important. You have to go and you have to bring that up. When you bring that up, you turn them into aesthetics. And that's why you remove the process of being generalized. I mean, because most of the film, it's like Miles Davis says this, that, many people cannot play like themselves. It takes a very, very, very long time to play like the way you are basically. Many people, there is always a general concept or somehow accepted form of themselves into society, into reality, into family, into the outside world, where always people want to conform. It's very sad, actually. But I always tell to my students that, really, you have to go inwards. You have to really start the journey of going inwards. And the more you go inwards, the more you realize that it's like that film. I don't know if you remember it. My God, Fantastic Planet. So
Oh, sure.
yeah, you always go to this this is seed, and you go to this seed, and you go to infinity basically. So it's a very similar process. So what I have managed to do over the past 25 years, I really try to um, come up with ways to connect with the way I live. And somehow I really created ways and aesthetics by trials and errors in order to really um, not reconstruct, not reproduce, but to be those feelings, to be those mystery, to be those fears that I had, to those traumas, literally to be them, not to illustrate, reproduce. I have problems with this RE, reproduce, um, uh, whatever you want to say. It's really not about reproduction. It's not about re-illustration. It's really about being those moments.
Mhm. It's
Sorry if I
less
talk too much.
creation and more acknowledgement, more, yeah, yeah. Yeah, no,
Yes.
that you're talking about feeling beyond understanding. The story that made me, because I've always felt that way, but the story that I heard when I was younger, that really made me recognize and embrace it. It was an old David Lynch, story. I don't remember if this was from someone that did a documentary of him or book. And so I'm sorry
Oh,
I
the
can't.
lady walking down the streets, the naked lady.
No, this. So it was this person that was doing a story on David Lynch. Um, went to see a Francis Bacon painting. Possibly Screaming Pope, but I could be mistaken on the specifics. And he's looking at this painting, and he's standing next to David Lynch, who's sharing his favorite, one of his favorite pieces of art. And he's looking, and there's just so much going on, man. He's just trying to recognize it, trying to make sense of it. And he turns to, you know, Mr. Lynch and goes, I'm sorry, David, I don't understand it. David Lynch looks over at him and says, your eyes understand it, because his eyes were going up and down and he was experiencing. Um, so this concept of, and then the guy, I don't want to say got the painting, but recognized that the experience itself was what mattered, and the fact that it elicited so much feeling that so often when people see films that are weird or different or involve a different structure, it either gets kind of pushed off of like, I don't get it. The fact that feeling is being elicited, whether it is confusion, whether it is mystery, whether it is uh, a sense of you have entered a land and we are seeing people do something that you've never seen or experienced, right? Imagine if we were in a forest and we see an animal and there's like eight legs and a giraffe neck, and we wouldn't get it. We wouldn't be able to like name it, but it's this idea that whether it's fear, whether it's wonderment, whether it's awe, whether it's confusion, something is created. And I feel like that's not the goal of every artist, but if that is what you're trying to strive for, or even just that is who you are, most importantly, is something that other people can't necessarily look into and identify with. Uh, that's something that, and maybe that kind of ties into the Homo sapiens project,
Hmm.
where it's something that my understanding of it is very much self-expression, very much unique, a conglomerate or a combination of all this footage creating stuff that it really expresses yourself, but is very, very heavy in this avant-garde wonder. Um, what what specifically, for people that don't really necessarily know that, and this massive amount of work is available through your Vimeo and your video on demand. So people, please check that and these other works out. But do you care to kind of elaborate on the Homo sapiens project in terms of specifically what it is, but then most importantly, how it is an extension of yourself?
Of course, of course. Thank you so much. Just one quick addition to what about that David Lynch story that you said, and it's great. Yeah, I love that. And also, I think it's a documentary called the Art Life. And there is another story David is saying about his childhood, which is very fascinating. I mean, I really sympathize with him. And he's talking about, one day, around the hour of the dusk, maybe 6, 7 o'clock in the evening, he was sitting on the porch of his house with his brother in this kind of very bizarre, kind of typical American suburbia,
Mhm.
this kind of a small
Picket
house.
fence.
Yeah, yeah, this kind of this lamp post and trees and kind of it was almost like 7, 8 o'clock in the evening. So it's not night, it's not day anymore. And suddenly he sees that this very strange looking old lady, completely naked, appearing from the darkness towards David and his brother and drinking milk from the bottle, and somehow the milk is dripping all over her, and she just basically kind of walking naked and drinking milk, and she passes away. Nothing happens. But the fact that this image have always remained with David throughout his life, and you can literally see these traces in Twin Peaks and Mulholland Drive and kind of Lost Highway and those films. This something that a very bizarre, unexplainable event is occurring. It has a tremendous amount of impact on you, but you have no way of penetrating to this entity, to this phenomena, because of it's interesting you mentioned about understanding. Because of lack of understanding, it remains,
Mhm.
always produces energy. In fact, this is another thing I'm talking about with my students, that the moment we understand something, it's the moment that we lose interest in it. It's a very strange, on contrary to popular belief. I always tell to my students that do not trust me. I always say that to them, that don't trust anything I say to you, could be completely hocus pocus and nonsense. So I want to clarify that, and I'm a very skeptic person, but at the same time that I have a very skeptic relationship with notion of understanding. It's a very overrated concept. And also, it's a very lazy concept because we have this massive obsession about understanding everything. Whereas, if you think about it, we're a bunch of mammals on a piece of rock floating in cosmos. I mean, there is, it just, everything is so cosmic. Everything is
Yeah.
so bizarre and mysterious. And these cosmic forces are not just up there, they have a massive amount of influence on our daily lives. Everything, the moon and the tides and the relationship with stars and everything. So we are, of course, living in a society which we are somehow created, and that's, of course, vital. But there is always these cosmic forces that really influencing us. And that's why, for example, I really love cosmic cinema. When you're dealing with Bellatar, 8 hours of Satan tango, what really matters is not the kind of rational events and relationship between these events. It's just this cosmic force, this
Mhm.
wind, this massive wind that is all over this film. You can feel the dust, you can feel the cold and the draft. It's all over the wind in the trees. It's a very cosmic force. So you don't necessarily understand again in the form of intellectual matter, but you feel these things in a very cosmic sense. So that's one thing. That brings me to Homo Sapien project. So basically, I have two strands of filmmaking,
Mhm.
and one is my feature length films, which I call them my day jobs. And I call them my day jobs, kind of 9 to 5 type of
Sure.
job. I do them. And then I have a nightlife, an ominous life, an addiction to cinema, which I call them Homo Sapien Project. Basically, Homo Sapien Project, this was a concept that I have immediately developed at the beginning, very first day of my filmmaking. I remember that this is not a joke when I say this, and I always tell it to my students. I started to make films on 1st of January 2000. I remember this vividly. Somehow,
The new.
maybe, yes, a new 21st century. From that moment, I wanted to make series of films for nobody. For me, this idea was very fascinating that you make films and then you have an urge and necessity, and it's very valid and important and beautiful to share with others. But for me, the only thing mattered at those days was just the act of creation. I just wanted to make films. And I knew that, these films are very hard to get into the festivals. You have to kind of look for funding and look for distributors, look for this, look for that. I'm talking about 25 years ago. And I really wanted to remove this from the equation. I just wanted to, like an addict who constantly is snorting cocaine or kind of drinking alcohol, it doesn't matter. You drown yourself into this sorrow. I wanted to create an atmosphere for myself just to make films. I wanted to feed my addiction to cinema by making. And this addiction really came from cinephilia. So I was a
Mhm.
cinephile way before that, a decade before that. So because
Sure.
when you're watching films constantly, you have this vampiristic relationship with cinema, You put your fang inside the body of cinema and you suck in as much as possible. It's a very ominous.
Down the wormhole of
Yes,
cinema. Yeah.
exactly, exactly. And you know how it's feel like. It's a very, when you watch one film, you want to watch two more films. When you watch two more films, you want to watch 10 more films. And of course, you can never watch too many films. It's always, it goes deeper and deeper. And it's just like a never-ending nightmare. And then when you're watching so many things, something in you wants to come out. It's almost like you're impregnated with ideas, impregnated with images, impregnated with cinema itself. So that is why I'm saying my consequences of watching films really made me a filmmaker. I had to. I'm not one of those filmmakers who have series of very defined stories or messages or let's say blocks of information that they want to convey this information to audience, and I use cinema as a vehicle, and I put my story on top of this bus, and this bus moves from point A to point B and delivers the message. I don't see this cinema. For me, this bus itself is everything, devoid of the passengers. I don't need storage. I don't need, but the fact that the bus moves, goes upside down, and the bus has the shiny colors, has windows, had this interesting wheel, and everything about it is fascinating. So for me, cinema itself is always and remain always the main concept. And Homo Sapien Project was a way for me to deal with this addiction, to deal with this phenomenon. And once you remove the notion of audience, once you remove the notion of distribution, once you remove the notion of sending yourself to festivals, once you remove the notion of sending your films to film critics and get some kind of a feedback, something liberates in you and you somehow do things. Of course, again, I need that as well. That's where my feature films are. But this is, for me, was a very ritualistic practice. It was a very ancient practice. So I started to make films And then things really happen when I start to make one film, and then I had to make another one and another one. And these films, they don't have titles, they don't have credits. It's simply called Homo sapien 1, Homo sapien 2. And I really wanted to respond to whatever was around me. For example, if I had purchased a VHS camera, I wanted to push this VHS camera to extreme limits. If I had bought a new lens, I wanted to play with this lens to the extreme level. If I would watch Akira Kurosawa's entire filmography, I wanted to understand what kind of effects Akira Kurosawa would have on me. If I wanted to go with my family to a journey in north of Iran and somehow go to the landscape and shooting landscape, I wanted to see, can I become a landscape filmmaker, removing all the anxiety and frustration of sending those films to festivals or sharing with the audience. So the act of creation for me was everything. And also for me, it was very interesting that these things was something really functions outside the world of capitalism, because we are really, the world that we are living is massively result orientated. If you don't produce results, you're labeled as a loser or bum. But I specifically wanted to become a loser, something that you make waste, you make wasteland, you make utterly useless things that
Mhm.
it doesn't come for the use of anybody. Nobody wants it. In fact, I might not even watch it myself. And then when you go through process of time, you end up with a legacy of yourself. And then after a few years, I realized that, oh, okay, I have made maybe 60 of these films. And then I realized that I have no memory of making these films. This filmmaking process, because it was so prolific, produced some kind of a cinematic amnesia for me. I forgot about them. And I couldn't believe that, can it be even possible? You make something from the scratch, but you forget about it. How
Mhm.
can this be possible? And then the fact that this produced or induced amnesia for me, that actually created more ideas for me. So wow, I'm really reinventing myself. I'm really reinventing my life. And I'm putting my memory into the vault or into the bank of these films. I'm somehow detaching myself. I'm putting myself into this entity. And it was fascinating. And at some point, when I reached maybe Homo sapien 100, I realized that I have no choice but to become a cannibal. I had to go and had to devour every single thing I had made. And I somehow dismantled everything and I created new version of those films. And of course, I kept everything, but somehow from certain point, I didn't shoot anything. I treated my own films as found footage because I didn't have memory of them. I didn't have any emotion for them. And I didn't hold them very valuable. I didn't love them. I didn't hate them either, but I just looked at them as working material. So for me, this mannerism, I learned so much from by going through Homo Sapien Project. Every single thing that I have learned in my entire life as a filmmaker is the consequence of my Homo Sapien Project. I didn't learn much from my feature filmmakings because I see them as a day jobs. I see them, there is a funding, there are people, I have responsibility. I have to be very mindful. I have to be very kind of civil. I have to somehow go through this thing. But everything I have learned, all the tricks, anything that I had learned was by doing this Homo Sapien project. And this is something I always talk about it with my students, that creation, a laboratory of experimentation, is far more important than
Mhm.
creating one single good film. Because for an artist, I think it's massively important to go through series of absolutely horrible films. But are you brave enough to intentionally make horrible films, bad films?
Mhm.
Because in the end, there is no bad films. Every single mistake is a hidden intention. And I'm not one of those filmmakers who, when I make mistakes, I would rectify these mistakes and I would correct these mistakes. I could never do this. I don't want to become a department of correction. I don't want to become a police. It's very interesting because once you correct, what does it mean? Correcting to what standard? Many people are really correcting themselves because there
Mhm.
is always this perfect image of themselves they know, which society really dictated to them or industry dictated to them. They always want to reach to that point. But that doesn't exist in my view. What exists is yourself. Can you really push the fog away? Can you really push this kind of very unclear space away and this kind of windy situation away and find yourself into this kind of, and by mistakes, by constantly making mistakes, you will reach that point. But you have to go through this mistake. So Homo sapien project for me was, of course, a controlled environment to make fuck ups, constant failures. Failures is actually a I'm very much interested in a couple of notions. One is failure. Second one is boredom. You're bored with yourself. You're bored with your
Mhm.
life. Boredom, as Walter,
Boredom is
is
boredom in the mundane is very important in cinema.
absolutely,
Yeah.
it's so underrated and it's so despised. People hate it, but I love it in a kind of Walter Benjamin sense. You know, you somehow because you have no way but to reimagine yourself. And the other
Mhm.
thing is vulnerability. I'm deeply interested in artists who are deeply showing their vulnerable states, not their masculine states, not their revealing their position of authority, not this extreme autocrat version of themselves, but deep, raw, vulnerable, raw, naked. Exactly. So naked, so raw. I mean, for example, in your films, it's a vulnerable state of mind that is looking at the world. It's so vulnerable. No matter what kind of characteristics this person is, it's a vulnerable state. It's a very raw state. It's something very underrated, and it's very addressed in the day that we are living. People are always about creating a power. You know, Hegel talks about image of power of themselves. You know, it's illusion. It's very for me, it's very kind of slowly leading to fascism as well, you know, collectively. Like we can talk about that as well, but this collective reproduction of power, micro powers, each and every individual is very horrific thing in my view as well. Whereas if you reveal your vulnerability, the greatest gift an artist can share with their fellow human is their vulnerability. And I love that, you know, in a very vulnerable, very weak complete weakness because it's not weakness, it's the ultimate strength if you're there enough to show your weakness, show your vulnerability, show your primal state, show your deeply human state. These are very raw beautiful things. So for me, Homo sapien project was a space to tackle these issues, to talk about these issues. And of course, sometimes I always say this as well. Something happened to me in the war and kind of I witnessed number of things, and I had to go to a series of therapeutic process in order to grasp the trauma of war, for example. And again, Homo sapien project was a mechanism, an infrastructure, a kind of like a Dr. Frankenstein laboratory to do his experiments, minus the pressure of sharing with audience, minus the pressure of sharing to film fest, just for the act of creation. Because ultimately, every act of creation is the act of resistance.
Yes. Yeah. In a lot of yeah, no, in a lot of ways, being able to share what you're creating, being able to share yourself, being able to have a willingness to, okay, this wasn't good, but I'm still sharing it. Or I wasn't necessarily planning this, but how this ended up is something that actually is a great expression of either myself or a great piece of self. A couple of different things you said hit like 8 different points I wanted to get to, which is great. But just on a fun side note, Ode to the Whale of Christ wasn't originally meant to be silent, you
Mhm.
know, and it's this idea of discovering as you're creating. And as you're getting to a point, the full backstory or a shortened version of the backstory was generally when I'm working on projects, as I'm in the process of making them, I like to send early cuts or early scenes or early, hey, I'm looking at this, and I just not necessarily in a traditional feedback of, oh, how do I get this to in, whatever, but just how do you feel about this? How does this, and like what comes to your mind when this unfinished thing I'm sending you is whatever. With Ode, we talked about this earlier with the text and everything, and these images. I was editing the video in the image before, a lot of the audio and stuff. So I sent like Jason Ewart is his name, fellow filmmaker. I sent him different shots and stuff, and then I was like, okay, I touched this up. What do you think? And he watched it, and when he hit play, he dived to his sound because he realized he had his sound all the way up, and his memory of what I showed him before was this erratic, loud, chaotic jazz music, right?
Yeah.
Which was completely silent initially. So this idea of eliciting sound, eliciting emotion via the memory that never actually existed. And that was one of those times where I trusted what was being created despite what I initially went in to do. And it really, like I said, I feel like it did all right. And, it, whatever people want to think, it's sweet. But it being a 30-minute black and white silent film, and X'd it out of a lot of a lot of
Yes.
people's willingness to watch, a lot of festivals, a lot of all that type of stuff. But I felt like this project works better without the sound, and it was something that wasn't until the fourth quarter that it was like, okay, yeah, let's actually dive into silence. And then Cicada, I Love You was footage from that film that was completely failed. It was blown out. It was, I was going to use that originally in the ending, and it just didn't work. And I'm just like, oh, okay, well, that is, I had this footage. I was talking to Maximilian, um, um, and just, I had this epiphany of, oh, okay, I can use it in this manner, in this repetitive way, in this, whatever. And it's this idea of, I kind of tie it with the Homo sapiens project, where it's this idea of, I have something that is an extension of myself. It doesn't really make a whole lot of sense, but it elicits feeling in me. I'm going to share it. And it
Exactly.
probably won't do,
Yeah, yeah. It's
much,
wonderful.
but that's fine because it's something that I made essentially for a friend of mine because he
Hmm.
had a show going on, across the
Yeah.
globe, right? And
Yes.
it's, yeah, yeah, yeah,
No, no, this is the prime. Remember, we talked about this, David. This is the prime example, literally,
yeah.
word by word, of what we talked about, that your film existed and created somewhere outside.
Mhm.
This is exactly what I mean. I mean, the second film, it literally was there somehow. It's
Yeah.
like an outtakes of
Mhm.
the main result, and suddenly it presented to you. But the fact that it's very, very important. The job, that is why I'm saying the job of a filmmaker is not really a technician job. And this is really
Mhm.
what I'm trying to teach to my students. It really exists. To me, filmmaking is very close to being a monk or being a priest, or not in a kind of moralistic sense. I'm an agnostic. I don't believe in any
Got a
religion.
pamphlet for you, by the way.
Yes, but in that sense, it's very similar. It's very similar to being a priest of your own religion, being a monk. You're somehow taking care of this very holy scripture, holy idea, and you live with this day and night, over and over and again. And you create an environment, you create a very spiritual, poetic environment, and your films start to appear themselves. I mean, for example, the film that you're saying, both of these films are happening in a car, and one of them has music, one of them is silent, and it's almost like a parallel, you know, it's kind of like a negation in a kind of Hegelian sense. They respond to one or these two films are the results of your life, you know, and then they were there, and you somehow you managed to put them together. In a way, we are doing the same thing with laboratory of experimentation because many people, David, are not doing this. People are writing series of linguistic condensed version of their thoughts on piece of paper, which is respectable, which is amazing. And they go and they illustrate this text and they substitute this text with images. So what you have is an animated script, walking scripts
Mhm, mhm.
which have, who am I to judge? I'm sure these people are doing a great thing. You know, people are investing time and money and resources, and I respect everything. But this is not something, it's not for me. I think we are doing something very different, something that is completely working, functioning in a very different mannerism. So in a way, I mean, I think when you embark on a journey of becoming a personal filmmaking, you subconsciously have to create a laboratory of experimentation, a
Mhm.
laboratory of looking at your life. Like, I call it a cinematic awareness with my students. You constantly have this awareness of cinema. You constantly have this relationship with this cinema 24/7. And once in a while, you're producing results. But I also argue that with my students, and I also equally believe that there are so many extraordinary filmmakers out there who haven't produced any films.
Mhm.
And that's, for me, that's also equally fascinating. People who really think about life and they look at life and they're creating life in their mind and they're also watching. To me, that those people are also filmmakers, you know. That, so the fact that there is cinema and there is films, for me, this awareness of cinema is, Godard talks about this. You know,
Yeah.
you might be an extraordinary cinema maker all your life without producing anything tangible. And I love this. I love this concept so much. And I think maybe people like you and me, that we are constantly like a frog, you know, leaping from this world and the other world. And somehow we go to this world, we bring one film to the natural life and we toss it, we kind of bring it to the natural life and we share it with other people. But at the same time, we have this awareness of cinema around you. I mean, this film also goes deeply. I mean, your films, of course, to me, there's a very, very vivid reference between your films and, for example, specifically Abbas Kiarostami's film, the great Iranian filmmaker. There's a great deal of references in this film. Look at these car scenes and it's kind of close-ups. So you're somehow digesting cinema. You're somehow constantly recycling cinema. I love, of course, your own surroundings and people. And I love the fact that people use filmmakers use people around, you know, families and friends. I love this so much. You see familiar faces. It's your world. It's a very, very honorable choice. So I like it very much.
No, thank you. Thank you. Yeah. And that's you talking about, for lack of a better term, scripting. Very much trying to create what is okay, plotting this down. I want this, I want this, I want this, I want this, which power to everyone, right? If that's how you express yourself. At times, though, it can feel like you're explaining a joke, right?
Mhm.
So when something's really, really funny, and then someone doesn't get it, and then someone's like, okay, let me explain it to you, okay, because the chicken, right, is crossing the road and it loses what was funny about it when you need to explain it, right?
Yes.
If you didn't feel the humor, so I can kind of feel that when I know these people that they they're in the process of creation, but they're most, and again, power to them, they're most comfortable of, I need to have everything written, I need to have everything this, and I need a show Bible, and I need these reference points. So when I'm explaining that, okay, I want to make this, it'll be like this scene. And okay, I need to do this. And it loses its humanity or it loses its soul, at least to me, in a sense, that we are no longer creating something, or in your case, finding something that is already a concept and finding the placement for that. We are trying to build this entity that is, I feel like at times, and I'm saying this respectfully to people that create differently than us, um, but thriller for thriller's sake, comedy for comedy's sake.
Yeah.
We have this film that we have this movie star and or this person that we know is really funny. This is a vehicle for that person so they can sell more toothpaste, right? Which is again because of all this, in a sense, other things can maybe be, but you can make a good argument for that existence.
Exactly.
Right? And
Exactly.
I love superheroes. I love, so I'm not saying, anti Marvel or anything like that. I grew up with comic books and I grew up with watching Jim Carrey, right?
Yes.
Jim Carrey in a lot of his movies where it was a vehicle of Jim Carrey. And that
Yes.
led me to movies, that led me to this, that led me to, everything that we all kind of start at this point. Um, but a couple of a couple of different things you mentioned that you don't necessarily do traditional script writing.
Hmm.
How and maybe I misheard you in the TIFF film festival, which you have a great, anyone that's watching, a great master class, um, that it's worth noting too that it is a condensed version of what is available through all the classes that you teach.
Yes.
So for sure, watch that, learn and enjoy it. I'm going to tease you about something from that too later, but uh, watch it, and if you want to watch more and learn more and have a chance to be as lucky as I am having a conversation with Rouzbeh Rashidi here, you can sign up for his classes, which are just they just look. Usually they're like 6 classes, stuff like that. But we'll get into the specifics of that later. But your new film, Elpis, I'm probably saying that wrong.
No, no,
Um,
correct.
Named after the Greek god.
Exactly. Exactly.
Okay, that makes sense. Um, that you wrote that one with the script, or
Yes.
you have, yeah. Which
Yes.
is, I think it's ironic because it's your least used of people,
Yes.
So the one
Exactly.
where you're dealing less with other human beings is the one that you're uh is the and you can really in a good way you can really feel it. Um but so one, getting into the process of going from what you've once referred to as the same method as Buñuel,
Hmm.
um, with this kind of surrealist, stuff like, to a still feeling very much like your string of films that are very much you, now with a little more of a script, and then
Hmm.
also the film itself being so much it's a war film. It's a
Hmm.
film dealing with the trauma, at least that I could feel, very much dealing with the trauma of experiencing, escaping, uh, growing up. You said the first 8 years of your life in
Hmm.
that you don't necessarily ever see the big battle guns and the
Hmm.
big, you don't see Marlon Brando coming out of the shadows or anything
Yes.
like that. But there's not a film I felt for the horrors and trying to rationalize ugly, nefarious devastation that can be created on the psyche from a film that is predominantly, uh, and in a good way, highly saturated landscapes and sculptures and uh, poetry
Hmm.
that I guess I'm asking eight different things here, but the concept of starting to work more in a scripted manner, at least in terms of that you've applied, and then also if you could just go into the process of
Hmm.
your newest film and how you created
Sure.
it and what it essentially is, you know, getting Atlas getting that globe off of his shoulder even just for a minute.
Sure, sure, sure. Thank you, David. I appreciate this. Just I want to somehow a little bit go back and some very interesting things that you were saying at the beginning before this. It somehow remind me that kind of you compare the way that we make films to the way that other people make films. This was very interesting. This somehow reminded me, of course, this is also aligned with the thing that I'm going to say right now. It reminded me of this saying that Nicholas Ray was saying that if everything was in a script, then why make film? So that's one of them. The other thing was this kind of Robert Bressonian concept that if you show everything, then it's not art. I mean, art really lies in suggestion. You have to really suggest things and somehow in a very fragmented way, and then perhaps you would produce an artistic result. You know, I'm somehow starting with Nicholas Ray and then Robert Bresson, and then I'm going to go even somehow a little bit deeper with Raul Ruiz, especially this concept that he was saying that films, he's saying that films are not composed of series of shots. He's saying that films are actually decomposed of shots. So the stuff, and he somehow makes a wonderful case for this. And he says that every single thing that you want to express and convey in your film, and you film it, it masks the thing that you want to say. So ideally, I mean, a film should be imageless, wordless, silent, but that's impossible. So for me, this concept is really everything. I mean, this concept is really, really an extraordinary. I learned a great deal by Robert Bresson and Raul Ruiz. And both of these two extraordinary filmmakers produce literature as well. I mean, Robert Bresson produced Notes on Cinematograph, which is an extraordinary book, and Raul Ruiz wrote a kind of a book in two volumes called Poetics of Cinema Volume 1 and Poetics of Cinema Volume 2. So this, I really have been all my life somehow trying to deal with this issue that, you know, films are actually decomposed of the shots. I mean, the stuff that you don't put into the film are far more important than the stuff you put into the film. And also he's talking about the notion that sometimes you want to convey that, you know, your character is standing up and going to the window, opening the window, and she's looking at this landscape, and you would have this shot in a storyboard. You would have a shot, the character is standing up, and you have another shot from a different angle, a window, she enters to the frame, and then you go outside, and then you somehow have a shot of a window, she opens a door, and then you would have a POV. That's one way, but you can really tackle and you can really deal with this issue with one shot that is absolutely irrelevant to all this. Maybe you can have a zoom at a candle and you convey the exact same feeling. You somehow really conveying the same emotionally feeling rather than literally translating this idea. So for me, it's a very important, I really have gone to the latter methodology to tackling things. And that's why, for example, you would have a film like Elvis that you're saying that, you know, I'm really dealing with war. But for me, I love the fact that you mentioned you don't see Marlon Brando. So if I would have shown the war, if I would have shown the main act, if I would have shown the entire trauma, if I have shown everything, then there is no poetry. Everything was there. And this is the problem. I mean, when I say problem, it's a kind of really politically incorrect word that I'm saying because I'm judging, but at the same time, I'm human, I'm completely full of flaws and mistakes. But this is the situation that we are dealing with the world. And when you're watching films in so many places, you see everything. You see
Mhm.
every single thing that is imaginable to human
Yeah.
being. There is no room for imagination. Everything is put there. Everything is put there. In fact, more, it's like hyper realism. So for me, it's very fascinating. The lack of substance, the lack of information always produces poetry. Decay and a state of degradation produces poetry. Rotting away produces poetry, not the actual thing. So that is why I wanted to somehow deal with herpes. I wanted to deal with a concept of war. I wanted to deal with the concept of a war that has happened in Iran, in all over the place in the Middle East. But I shot the film in the Baltics in 42 years later. Why? But because for me, when I was walking around in this strange forest, a strange pagan forest in the middle of nowhere, almost like an alien, these themes were inside me. I was contemplating, kind of remembering these things. And with these sensations, with this massive amount of internal feeling and emotions and memories, I was making these films. And Godard talks about this, that you have, when you're making films, you have two ways. You can act like a police and you would investigate your life and you go about factuality, you go about facts and you investigate your life and you somehow bring your investigation as some kind of a police report to the headquarters in your present, and this is your final film. Or you can go from memory, which is a very deceiving thing. Memory is never in the state of absolutely being frozen. Memory is actually a living organism. It deceives you, it changes, it multiplies, it somehow constantly dances with you in your body. And each time you remember an event, it alters itself, it changes itself. It has the main radiation, main energy, main line force, but its manifestation through the process of remembering, it always changes. And you
Mhm.
can never fully trust it because it has such a strange, enigmatic power. So for me, the only way to tackle this film was to somehow showing something that is decomposed of the original events. And for the first time, I mean, I from the year 2000 until 2019, I never wrote even one single word on the pages. I always went into the reality. I went to my life. I had the camera, I had the actors, and we started to do things. And this is something in a stage, I call it a bodily filmmaker, devoid of brain. When I'm shooting, I'm really a body. I'm not a brain. So I went and I did things. And in editing, I am absolute brain. I just think only. So there is no body. In editing, I did the calculation and mathematical and engineering and manufacturing and orchestration and what have you. So the combination of these two, bodily and brain, have resulted my films for 19 years, from the year 2000 until 2019. But for LPs, because I really wanted to, my life had changed, my personal life had changed. I had gone through process of divorce. I had gone through the process of course, it was pandemic. All of us are going through a very bizarre metamorphosis. And many people hated pandemic, but pandemic for me was a heaven. It was a graceful period. I loved it so much because the life has stopped and the rhythm of life was so frantic and all these fogs somehow went away and I could see myself. I could see that I'm really aging, growing, decaying. And for me, it was a very vital process. And that was the only time that I felt that something within me called me, even in my dreams, that I need to write. So I
Mhm.
started to somehow systematically write this script in a kind of very poetic manner. And the entire process of writing this script was amazing. I loved it. It's something that I really enjoyed. It took 3 years. So I
Hmm.
somehow wrote so many. I wrote about maybe 120 pages. And then for 2 years and 1 year, I slowly kind of chiseled them away and kind of shaved them away and got rid of so many things. And I somehow ended up with the text that you would have on the film. And based on that, somehow based on the things I wrote, I just went to the Baltics with my partner Elika Ostrov, who did an amazing job on scouting this location. She really brought me to some very bizarre, otherworldly landscapes, and we started to shoot things. And for this film, I really wanted to kind of work with aerochrome, which is a technique that was developed during the Vietnam War, and kind of this red color that you're seeing. When the American army was somehow dropping bomb in Vietnam, they wanted to kind of find these guerrilla fighters in Vietnam, and they developed this technique that would turn the color green into red, and they would identify these soldiers. So it's a killing technique machine. It's really related to war. But I wanted to use something like this because I was also dealing with war, but not in a literal sense. If this kind of American invention was for literal sense, here I wanted to use it as a poetical sense. And I wanted to somehow connect this technique to the vessels of my memory, which kind of the blood stems from it, comes from it, and goes to the landscape, goes to the world of this film. And the entire world is feeding from my within. And that's why you have this color, red color thing. So every single green color is converted into red. And the way I did it is just by creating lots. I created this lot and I somehow implement it into the camera, and you somehow enable it, and it turns all the green into red. And the film was shot with series of 19th century lenses, with the pictorial type of lenses. So you have this very ancient archaic lenses that is so slow and so defunct and full of errors on the brain of a very modern 8K camera, which somehow constantly creates this I love create conflicts. I love to create problems for myself. I'm not one of those filmmakers who want to have an easy shooting, because when you create problems for yourself, you have to come up with bizarre ways to fix it, and through this fixation you will end up with aesthetics. For me, that was the way to create as when you solve, because you can never solve it. You have to find something else to replace it, to substitute it. And one problem, one hassle creates another hassle. But I like this because it's intentionally induced and injected to the process of filmmaking for me to constantly pushing myself to new limits. So in a way, Elpis was a massive departure from my previous films, and this is a phase I'm currently at, and it's kind of essay films, this poetic film. And I'm somehow developing another film at the moment, very similar to Elpis, and we will see how long this phase lasts.
I love that. Yeah. 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 That's I remember I watched it at night, I just kind of leaned back, I had my phone, everything like that. And I just I just felt this inward feeling of this weird mix of terrified grace, right?
Hmm.
This feeling of seeing something so alien yet also peaceful. And
Yes.
with the narrator, going through the poetry and what she was saying, it was so it was so beautiful yet horrifying. And it was just this great this great duality of feeling, this great just combination of so many different things going on. If whoever's watching this, if you get a chance, because I don't believe it's on video on demand yet, right?
Not yet, yeah.
Um, if you get a chance to sit just at any festival near you, I highly recommend it because I feel like earlier we mentioned the different phases you've been on, right?
Yes,
The this early black and white, uh, almost hyper realism, uh, to to singular people, to more color, to when Maximilian and some of these more guys got introduced to your to the whole squad, right?
yes,
And then the colors becoming more vibrant, the actions of the individuals becoming more, you know, abstract, to now very, very, very less. I mean, technically, there's a person in the very beginning, you know, with the hands and stuff like that. But for the most part, there's almost no people that. Um, and we'll see what you create, and we'll see what you go forward with. If this is the entrance into a new phase of your work or a new wave of what you're doing, and maybe it's that you're now in Germany. You know,
yes,
maybe it's because of the pandemic you were forced away from everybody.
yes,
It could be a number of reasons that we might not be able to pinpoint or romanticize until we're looking at it in the past. Um, but just through your different phases and through your different, you know, everything, you talk so much about the horrors you face, you know, in Iran. Um, if you're comfortable to kind of talk
yes, yes,
about
yes.
whether it was escaping, whether it was leaving, but then also how we kind of met through mutual friends, you know, um, uh, how you got to go from here to going to Ireland and meeting a lot of these people, and then creating the Experimental Film Society. Now, I
Yeah,
know uh, in a few interviews you've kind of gone over the formation of it. While you were in Iran, you were somewhat privately curating films. Um,
yes,
Later, I'd like to ask about if you recall the specific films, and if you recommend, because I know you're curating for TSC Festival.
yes.
A lot of Iranian work, which I'm completely fascinated. I don't know if it'll be available online, but if it's something that whether privately or here, you could let me know. That
Of
I
course, of course.
follow a lot of these people, but specifically for this, your time in Iran, whether it's through creation, whether it's personal, whether it's, you know, curation of films and the community you created there,
Hmm.
to leaving, going to Ireland, and meeting a whole bunch of other filmmakers, and kind of starting a a new wave of some kind, experimental film society wave, whatever we want
Yes.
to attribute to it.
Sure, sure, sure. Of course. No, no, feel free to. I say I'm one of those people who I'm very comfortable with sharing anything because for me it's actually very important because perhaps it could be useful in order to understand the evolution of one filmmaker, you know, because these details are not just like a gossip column, you know, they have very important fact in each and every. I personally read about all the filmmakers that I love, you know, I read about their personal life as much as is available publicly, or I read about their biography. It's important, you know, that's what I'm saying. I mean, it's really, for me, it's impossible to separate the art from the artist. I could never do this, of course. So yeah, I mean, my life is deeply intertwined with experimental film society because in Iran, exactly in the late 90s and early 2000, when I wanted to make film, I mean, really, there was no a place for experimental cinema. And experimental cinema was somehow like a bastard child that had to always go and become friend with kind of in documentary section or kind of video art section or what have you. But there was no awareness of experimental cinema. There was no kind of tradition of experimentals. Iran is actually very strong in history of cinema. That we have a very kind of respectable art house cinema, documentary, and also animation. But experimental cinema was very much unknown, and I knew about so many people like Amos Vogel or Jonas Mekas or kind of Maya Deren, people who really somehow created series of collectives for themselves and for people around them to thrive and to survive. So I did the same thing. I mean, I knew about London Film Co-op. I knew about Cinema 16, where the collective that Amos Vogel, the writer of the book Cinema as a Subversive Art, he had created, and he used to kind of curate things. See, by curating and by putting on show, really you create an awareness of cinema. This is something that also Henri Langlois had created with the cinematic in Paris. You know, there is this guy, there's always this kind of a figure, like a custodian of cinema who comes and somehow put things in motion, animates them. And usually these people are not filmmakers. I mean, the only exception might be Jonas Mekas, who is an extraordinary filmmaker on his own, but also he's also the founder of the Anthology Film Archive in New. I knew about these people, and I really did the same thing. I tried to organize screenings. I went. I'm very good at. I'm a very anal person. I'm very extremely punctual. And I'm in Germany. I feel like home, you know, because here everybody's on time and everything. I love it. And I'm very good at categorizing things. I could be a very good librarian, you know. I kind of categorize things, I label them. So I create a very nice archive because when I do this, my mind is very anal, you know. Somehow I create an archive for these things. And through these screenings and curation and finding people, I really managed to create a very small niche of experimental cinema in Iran and in Tehran, basically. It was very small, a slow movement, a slow breathing. And EFS was in its infancy those years. But it had created a sensation, it had created a sense of belonging. And some people, by the end of, let's say, the fourth year, were specifically making films in order for their film to be shown in these gatherings. So for me, it was fascinating. Some people really producing films just to be shown in an EFS type of a setting. So it was amazing. And after that, because in Iran we have massive brain drain, we have massive amount of exodus, we have a great deal of people who are constantly immigrating, and my family also had immigrated, and we really ended up being in Ireland. And when I went to Ireland, I felt that, you know, this is Europe, you know, everything will be already accomplished and done and everything is ready. But then I realized that, you know, there is no strong sense of tradition, experimental cinema as well. So I had to do the same thing. But this time it was different because I got to know some extraordinary people. The most important of them is Maximilian Lecain. Max for me is a very important figure for me. He is perhaps someone who I deeply look up to, and I love him so much. He's like my big brother. And for the first time ever in my life, I felt that I have someone who I can look up to. I have someone who I can call my big brother, you know, and it's like a father figure I could never have or had back in my life because I was always a very angry, not in a physical sense, in a kind of political sense. I was so angry at so many things, lots of frustration, lots of despair. And I was one of those people who I never saw anybody that I can somehow call my guru or my somehow father figure or someone who is culturally deeply influenced me. All those people were dead. You know, my idols were already dead or some very far away people. But Max was one of those people who I can really learn from, and I learned a great deal from him, specifically to a side of cinema that I was never exposed to. And he really opened my eyes, and he really taught me so many things, specifically horror cinema or sci-fi cinema or B movies or entire a spectrum of cinema that was very unknown to me. On top of that, he's a great friend, a very reliable friend, and together we really managed to create Experimental Film Society into a very respectable and kind of well-established niche of cinema in Ireland and Europe and slowly internationally by somehow producing films and also organizing more than 200 screenings and also producing two books and what have you. So the people I collaborated in Ireland, Max specifically, was fascinating. But when you're dealing with this amount of work, with this amount of, because I did almost everything myself and with Max. I never asked for help from anybody, and I never got funding for Experimental Film Society in my entire life, except one time, which was the end of it. So for 19 years, I was doing everything by myself, and it really exhausted me. It really pushed me to really the state of collapse because I was also very obsessive. I was also in charge of all the curating and everything. That's a curse and a blessing because I did everything on my own. I'm not one of those filmmaker curators, let's say, or organizers or funders who would somehow have a round table and ask hundreds of people, what I don't have time. I never did this, I was always just went on and I did things for myself. That's a good thing and bad thing. The good side of it is you're constantly producing result. The bad side of it, you're overworking yourself. You're somehow putting yourself into a tremendous amount of pressure. So for me, Experimental Film Society was a necessity, not only for me, but also for all the filmmakers who were involved in Experimental Film Society. It created a hub, a protected place, and a trusted environment for us to produce film, to screen them, and to economically somehow make them. And it was a very, very graceful and important and vital period for me for 20 years, for exactly 20 years. And I'm really glad that I somehow went through it. But I reached the limit. I really achieved what I wanted to achieve by the end of it. We created a legacy. And even when you read about these film collectives all over the world, they usually have a lifespan between 10 to 20 years. It's a phenomenon in history of cinema. Almost all of them. I mean, you don't see a film collective that kind of somehow lasted for 50 years or somehow is they have a very intense period of collaboration and productivity, and they cease to exist. And what happens after is someone has to take care of this legacy. So for me, I think I have really done my job in Experimental Film Society, but that's the closed chapter for me. And all I have to do is to protect and to somehow keep this legacy alive because we have about more than 50 feature-length films and about maybe, let's say, 500 short films. It's a massive archive, David, if you think about it. And I have created so many video on demand packages and everything, and I have all the films in multiple hard drives. So taking care of these hard drives, keep the website alive and keep everything available as video on demand is my legacy. So, I mean, just the beginning, like LPs was the kind of different phase for me to go to a new phase of filmmaking. I also embarked on a journey of teaching and in 2019. So kind of creation of LPs and also teaching came after Experimental Film Society. So now I'm in the phase of EFS Film School, where everything I have learned and everything I teach in EFS Film School is actually about going through the process of working with so many people in Experimental Film Society. So if I wouldn't have gone through Experimental Film Society phase, I really could not bring anything to my teaching. So every single thing I teach is the result of Experimental Film Society. So yeah, I mean, I don't know if I answered properly, but it's like a condensed version of this.
Oh, sure.
Also, it's
Yeah.
worth mentioning that just a quick thing before we kind of close this chapter. I was never able to make a living out of my own films and Experimental Film Society. In fact, like John Cassavetes, you had to put everything from your pocket into this in order to animate this entity. So teaching for me was an inevitable consequences because it's for the first time that for the past few years I'm able to somehow remain independent and create a very small but honorable income from my life as a filmmaker.
well, I can say with certainty and fact that your admiration for Maximilian Lacane is very much a two-way street. When I talked to him, a few weeks ago, he was a lot of praise towards you, and it feels like your collaboration and your friendship, both of you clearly grew a lot from each other, um, and helped each other in a lot of ways. And he's somebody that, like, if I were to do one of those favorite filmmaker lists, seeing a lot of his work, he's really up my alley for. I
Me
just love,
too. Me too. Me too.
absolutely love his work and yours as well. Um, and well, yeah, we'll do that. We'll do this again. Well, first, you can hear me all right, correct?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Perfect.
Okay, perfect. We had on the other side, there's a party going on, so I just wanted to make sure that noise wasn't coming through.
No, no,
Uh,
no.
last time we did um, Michael Higgins. What a great guy!
Amazing. Great
Anything,
guy.
great guy.
Amazing. He is.
What are
He's
your
such
thoughts
a
on Michael Higgins?
Michael Higgins is one of those people that when you're with him, you feel extremely happy and joyous because he's such a down to earth and wonderful person. I had some amazing time with him. I miss my friends. That's the thing. That's unfortunately when I moved to Ireland, I miss these guys. I miss them so much because we were like a family, literally. We were constantly together. Me, Atul Sapur Hosseini, Jan Klavadetcher, Maximilian Lekin, Michael Higgins, we were like a family. It was
Yeah.
the best years of my life, really, extraordinary time. So I miss those years. At the same time, you reach to the point that, people are getting married, going to relationship, have jobs. It was a time, a very unique time, and I cherish it with the deepest part of my core. I was lucky in Ireland that I met these extraordinary individuals, and we lived, we really lived those moments. We may not be able to somehow reproduce this energy, but we really made the most of it. And we have these wonderful films that we produce collaboratively. So yeah, I mean, amazing people, all of them.
Well, it's cool seeing all three of you, right? Kind of very much honoring and in a sense continuing what you've done with the EFS,
Yes,
but all doing, all growing from and expanding and doing something so different. You
exactly,
were at the school, um, Maximilian Lacan with the Cine Salon,
exactly,
and Michael Higgins with Out of Focus. And
exactly, exactly.
so I guess what, Germany, Cork, and Kilkenny, right?
Yes,
Um,
yes, yes, yes,
and it's just so exciting to. It's not just your new chapter, but it's
yeah,
all the guys you were associated with are all killing it and creating their own. It's almost like you guys were a wrestling faction, right?
exactly.
And you've all gone apart. You all have your new tag team partners. And
Totally.
it's
Yes, yes.
still
And when I was watching your film, David, I must say this. You are one of the filmmakers that we really could have been easily part of EFS. It's like a member that we never had an honor to have. I can really see so many affinity and connection between your film and our work. And I'm very glad that at least at this point we got to know each other. And you were saying to me a few days ago on Instagram that you might be going to Ireland. If you decide to go to Ireland, I will definitely make the trip. And me, you, Max, Michael, we would sit down and hang out, and we would have a time of our life. And I think you should do this. You will love it. It's a very interesting place to visit. It's a stunning place to shoot landscapes. You really, if you're into landscape, really an extraordinary place. And of course, the biggest part of it is to see these people. Max. Really, you will love him. He is a great guy, really. I see it, I tell it with the bottom of my heart. I love him so much and I learn from him so much. And I think anyone who is around him can learn from him. So I'm not sure if I contributed anything except my friendship, but I personally have learned so much from him, and I think you would also love him as well if you see him. He's a great guy.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, yeah. Um, the, um, yeah, I think what do you have now that you have your newest film
Yes,
is in festivals, it's being seen more. I know you have another series of classes people can sign up for.
yes,
I believe at March, is that correct?
yes. It's I
Uh,
have yeah.
how can people sign up for that?
Sure,
Because
sure,
it's
sure.
something that I can't stress enough. If anyone watching this, that I mean, if you've made it this far, right?
Yes.
You'd be crazy not to sign up for one of these classes,
Thank you.
or even just reach out and just be like, "Hey, I admired your films." All these types of ways people can be connected. But how can people sign up for the
Yeah,
experimental
yeah, of
film
course.
site school?
Sure. So my really entire focus is now into EFS Film School. I mean, apart from my own filmmaking, that's like a constant present, of course. But I'm somehow really reducing curation and kind of these type of activities and putting my entire energy into teaching because David, I really love teaching. I just don't do it just for the sake of creating it. I just love it. For me, it's
Yeah,
like extension of my filmmaking. When I teach, when I have those moments, I go really to a state of trance and I love working with people. And then I see the results of their work. It's like I made them myself. I see so much of myself into this film, and they always make me proud. And the amount of talents that you find in these classes are really astonishing. Really amazing work. So, I mean, at the moment, I have two courses. One is an online course, which lasts for 6 weeks. The next one starts on 9th of February throughout March. And I have another a physical master class, which is like a 5 intensive days in Berlin that is happening after March. The date has not defined yet, but the way people can find out about them is throughout my social media and also efsfilmschool.com, which you can find entire description about each course and everything. You will find out about them. Yeah, I mean, this is something that I will be doing, and I dedicated my life to this. And I'm also developing another feature film. I'm somehow writing heavily and shooting a little bit, and hopefully I can finish it next year. But it's very much similar to the process of LPs and kind of this kind of landscape and voiceover, and also this kind of the way of shooting with 19th century lenses. Yeah, this is me at this point, and I really want to thank you for this wonderful, wonderful conversation. You're a very warm person, and also really like your personality. Very warm, very kind, very generous, and I also very much like your film. And I hope we keep in touch. We do things. I know you run your wonderful festival. Maybe I can send you something as well from my students. You told me that yeah. So hopefully we keep this
yeah.
going.
Send everything my way then. you know, um, uh, sweet to just go off. I know it's after I watched it, I teased you. When you were doing your master class with TIFF, uh,
Yeah.
you started right away, and you're such just a great person. You connect with people so well, and you're so excited to learn and teach that you just jumped right into taking questions. And
Yes.
the
Yes.
people are going back and forth. It was just such a delight to watch that. Like
Yeah.
after your
Yeah.
third or fourth, you see the person running is like, oh,
Yeah. Yeah.
let's
That
let's
is
watch
good.
the videos first. You just
Yeah.
laugh. You're just
It was so
such a
funny.
connector with people
Yeah.
that
Yeah. Yeah.
you just couldn't. You got up there and you
Yeah,
just
man. They're
couldn't
like kids. What can we
to
do?
teach. It's just like one of those things. Oh, we gotta watch the videos first.
Yeah. So
That
funny.
it was just so that if people have an opportunity to, whether it's if they're lucky enough where you're in their town giving a lecture, or if it's something that, oh, you have a class coming up. I mean, if anyone's interested, like
Yes.
yeah, this is this. such a great opportunity and something that you generally don't see a lot of people doing. And I can tell it's very much um all the times you talked about it seems like a very personal and a very you're finding the individual and learning and teaching with them as opposed to all right, so today we're gonna learn about the lower thirds and where you want the name and the logo goes here. You know, so and I mean that kind of goes your concept of dancing with the film. It's not just that film is poetry or you're dancing with whatever, but you very much do that with life. And
Exactly.
you can see it in your work. You can see it when you're talking with people that, I mean, you kind of you kind of talked about where my work can be kind of brooding and long takes and darkness, and then you meet me and I'm so different in
Yes.
terms of how I present myself.
Yeah.
Very much, you are just an absolute joy, you know,
Thanks,
to
brother.
talk
Thank you.
to to ramble with. That uh, your films are very unique, very singular, very you, but then also you are a delight. You are a good person. You are someone.
Same to you, brother. Same to you.
The opportunity, please take it. And all the specifics of the links and stuff I'll put in the
Thanks,
spiel
brother.
below. But
Thank you.
yeah, and I kind of ended this, or I had it in the middle, but what is something or whether it's a film, whether it's a concept, whether it's a moment that you're most proud of, that whether it defines you or something that you look back and like, yeah, I did that, you know, because so often we try to be humble and we try and a lot of times we believe it where, oh, this is an extension of this moment and this was this time and I'm always moving forward. But just to take a step back and look at these 20 plus years of making films and learning and of having fun with failure and ultimately growing and changing or evolving or decomposing
Yes.
what we're whether it's singular or it's a series of moments or films or art pieces or friendships or whatever that you can say you're not necessarily like choosing your favorite child, but something you're proud of.
Yes, that's an extraordinary and also fundamental question, but I think I have an answer for it. I think I know the world and the universe because of cinema, not the vice versa. So for me, the only reason I physically exist into the world is because of cinema. So for me, it's a very, very important factor, you know. I owe my life. So for me, it's not just making a film, you know, Abbas Kiarostami talks about this, you know, living is also an art form, the art of living. And I learned this and continuing to learn this is because of cinema. So, and in fact, we are here because of cinema, because the fact that I am seeing David Johnson is because of cinema. So I'm grateful. I love to show my appreciation and gratefulness for cinema for allowing me to live first and foremost, to not commit suicide, literally, I mean it, to prolong my life and to be able to make films and also to be able to meet people like yourself. So this is a very important thing, this acknowledgement that cinema for us, for me, is that's why I'm saying it was never about necessarily just storytelling. It's far more important, you know. It's a way of living, you know. I couldn't have known the world if it wasn't because of cinema. So for me, it's very important to acknowledge this. We are here, we are talking, communicating hundreds of miles away from each other, yet we feel so close, David. We feel I can see this barrel behind you. I can smell it even. You see this kind of shelf behind me, but maybe you can have a tangible feelings because we are connected with this vessel of cinema. So I would like to emphasize on this that you know if you have a passion and persuasion and persistence to somehow follow the thing that you love, it always brings, it's always therapeutic, it's very beautiful, and you get to know so many extraordinary people in your life. So for me, cinema is everything, really. It's a way of living.
Any any words of advice for the what do you call your fans? The Ruse bedheads or
Yeah, yeah. I have an advice actually. My advice is the same. I begin my classes that do not trust me. Trust yourself. For me, it's extremely important thing. Trust your instinct and intuition because there are so many answers. If it's not all of them are existing within us, but we are always looking outside for these answers. Whereas these answers are really in our memories and psyches and within. So really you have this intuitive relationship. Tarkovsky in his book Sculpting in Time, he talks about this intuition. You know so many things, but you have to trust it. So if you trust yourself, this is a very rewarding experience. So perhaps that's the only thing I can share with my.
yeah, yeah.
And lastly, it's important to acknowledge your warm invitation, David. I really deeply appreciate this opportunity, and
Yeah.
I don't take it for granted. Thank you so much, and I genuinely hope that we meet in real life as well.
Well, yeah, thanks for being on. Yeah, no, I'll in 3 seconds I'll hit the end record button, but I'll have all your links below. Look look down here, folks. And yeah, bada bing, bada boom.
Fantastic, brother. Keep in touch.